Thank you for joining us at today's webinar entitled Creating Buy-In to Establish a Culture of Assessment. This webinar today is going to be hosted by Dr. Karen Bobak, who is the Dean of Chiropractic Education at New York Chiropractic College. Dr. Bobak began her academic career at New York Chiropractic College as faculty in 1994, while continuing to focus on her own patient care. She provided instruction throughout the Chiropractic Clinical Science curriculum at NYCC and currently serves as Dean of Chiropractic Education. She earned her EDD in Executive Leadership from St. John Fisher College in 2013, where she focused her studies on assessment, organizational culture, and implementation of change. She is a fellow of the International College of Chiropractors and has authored and collaborated on numerous conference presentations within higher education and chiropractic education. Just as a side note for all of the attendees out here, I know I just said chiropractic a lot. That just so happens to be because it's what Dr. Bobak works within. But this webinar is definitely relevant to others beyond just the chiropractic educational field. No matter really what kind of program you're coming from, Dr. Bobak is going to have good beneficial information for you to hear. As we go throughout this webinar, it's pretty likely that you'll probably have some questions for us. So if you do, just use the GoToWebinar control panel found on the right-hand side of your screen. It may not look exactly like the one that's on the screen right now, but you will have a small little widget within that panel that will allow you to type in any questions you might have. So we will do a Q&A at the end. Make sure that you're giving us the questions if you have any, and we'll be sure to answer those during the Q&A section at the end. Can I get the very next slide, Dr. Bobak? Thank you. And then just for everybody else's, or for all the attendees' information, we have another webinar coming up next week on Wednesday, September 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern. This one will be hosted by Dr. Jennifer Matthews, who is the Associate Professor of Pharmaceutical Science at St. John Fisher College's Wegman School of Pharmacy. And this upcoming webinar kind of takes Dr. Bobak's a little bit further. It's more about actually showing faculty how they can read assessment data and understand what it means. That way they can take action on it. So we're kind of continuing this series of implementing new assessment systems in an institution with the webinar next week. So let's begin with Dr. Bobak now. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Carter. I appreciate your help, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. And I hope you'll find that some of the information that I'll be able to share with you will be useful to you, and maybe actually have some fun along the way, and actually kind of give you some tips that you might actually be able to take back to your desk with you when you get back to work in a little bit. So what I really want to go over today are just a few elements of the change and driving change that we've really talking about. First of all, I just want to kind of start with really what drives our program, and just so you get an overall view of what my perspective is. We'll go over some of the definitions that we'll talk about, from things like buy-in and a culture of assessment. And really the big question is, why do you want buy-in? What's the big deal with buy-in? I'll tell you what we did to some degree, and I'll give you some hints as to, what does buy-in look like, and what is it that you really need to be looking for. So just a little bit about me and about our institution. As Carter mentioned, I'm the Dean of Chiropractic Education at New York Chiropractic College, and we are located currently in Seneca Falls, New York, which is right in the heart of the Finger Lakes. And for the large part of our institution's history, the college was actually located in the downstate New York area. And about 20 years ago, the entire campus moved to Seneca Falls, which was no small feat in and of itself. But at that time, we were a single-purpose institution. We were focused completely on training doctors of chiropractic. About 10 years ago, we saw a shift in our institution, and we began adding on some auxiliary programs. And now we have several master's degree programs as well. The largest program still remains the Doctor of Chiropractic program, but we also have master's degrees in acupuncture and oriental medicine, applied clinical nutrition, just to name a couple of our auxiliary programs. But really, the focus of the institution really revolves around the mission, and that is we're committed to academic excellence, quality patient care, and professional leadership. So what really drives our program? That's really the question of where we are, why we do what we do, and what is our search to try to continue to utilize our data in the best possible way. So as I said, our mission really is the focus of our institution. Every element of our institution really has some sort of a link back to that institutional mission. Every program, our overarching professional development plan, all of those link back to one or several elements of that of our programmatic or institutional mission. The other things that are really driving our program are professional competency, and again, our quest for how do we know that our students are really learning. And these two elements are really coming out of something that I think a lot of institutions really have and kind of lurking at their back door, and that's the changing accreditation standards. Our programmatic accreditor, the Council of Chiropractic Education, recently updated our accreditation standards. We went from a very numerically based system to a very competency-based system. And while that is a very positive thing, and it actually brings us in line with the bulk of healthcare professional education across the United States, it is a tremendous shift for us and for the chiropractic profession and professional education as a whole. So that is that the demonstration of competency at that particular level is a significant driving force. And then our regional accreditor, we're accredited by the Middle States Commission on Higher Education, and their standard 14 is the assessment of student learning. And we really need to know on a very granular level, how do we know that our students are really learning? So in that, in the driving forces of our program, the first thing we had to admit to ourselves was that we didn't think we were doing a good enough job assessing our students. So it's kind of like that, everybody knows about a 12-step program, right? The first thing you have to do is admit that you might have a problem. And we thought that we did because we thought that we could really identify all of those elements that could link us to demonstrate our compliance with those new competency standards or with our accreditation standards for Middle States. We thought we could do that, but we also thought that it didn't demonstrate excellence. And our mission is not to say that we're academically good. We demonstrate academic excellence. So we found this to be a problem for ourselves, and we identified that there needed to be something else going on. So what changes were we then trying to create? One of the changes we knew we had to try to create was to shift our faculty culture to a culture of assessment. And you have to remember that changing a culture, but change of any kind, does take years to implement it. You look back to what John Cotter had from Harvard talks about, change really takes years to really become solidified within an organization. And he also talks about the fact that only about 30% of change actually is successful, basically because too many organizations declare victory way too early. So you've really got to get down to it, and we really identify that. And then the other change was we really needed a student culture change to where students were actually more engaged and more empowered with their own academic data. Students really, especially in our perspective, students really need to be motivated by more than just the completion of courses or the completion of a program. Becoming a healthcare professional carries with it really the expectation of excellence and dedication to those future patients. So we really needed to be able to, we felt that we owed it to those future patients to do the best that we can to really focus on the students and their learning as well. So when you look at organizational culture, there's a number of different ways to look at organizational culture, and there's a number of different authors that define organizational culture, whether it's George Koo or Edgar Schein, there's a number of different authors that will do that. But the bottom line is that culture really is kind of just the way things are done. It's those deep values and beliefs that are shared by those organizational members. It is formed over decades. It's a very, very powerful internal force. George Koo actually refers to culture as the invisible tapestry, and I think that just actually paints a really a very powerful picture of that it's the interwoven nature of all the elements that create organizational culture. And culture creates that it helps people to identify the significant specific elements, and it really helps them feel comfortable in different situations. It just provides that understanding of what's going to happen because that's just the way things are going to be done around here. So as you can imagine, there's every institution or every organization really has a slightly different culture depending on their history and the processes that they've gone through. As I said, our institution moved across a state from a downstate New York area to a very rural upstate New York setting. That was a huge cultural shift, and the fact that the institution survived is a pretty impressive feat itself. But there was elements that had to be carefully carried through. So there's really several different frameworks that you can use to look at organizational culture. The one that I have laid out here right now is actually called the Competing Values Framework. And it was developed by Cameron and Quinn, and it's really based on the competing values of the organization's flexibility versus stability, and then the opposite value of the organization's internal focus versus the external focus. And this framework, if you use this framework, 4 types of cultures emerge. And you have a clan culture that's more familial and collegial, kind of a supportive culture. And a democracy culture, which is more entrepreneurial and innovative. A market culture, which is more hard-driving and competitive. And a hierarchical culture, which is more controlling and top-down and a lot more formal. Now, the cool thing about all of these cultures isn't that they exist, but the really cool thing is that there isn't any one best culture. So no matter what culture an institution or an organization has, that is its best culture. The goal is to really identify the culture and the elements that are part of that culture, so that you can work within it. You can really play to the strengths of that culture. You wouldn't get a football coach that would say, take the star quarterback and put him on the defensive line. You want to play to your strengths, and you want that quarterback to be able to do his job and be able to throw that long pass or be able to coordinate the offensive line. So you always play your strengths. And many authors actually have reiterated the process that if you implement a change process that disregards those cultural norms, you're going to become frustrated. And if you use those cultural norms, actually, you're going to be advancing to the goals that you really want to be able to utilize. So in our process, what we did was, when we looked at our culture and we did some discussions and we did some work with it, we found out that our culture is actually very traditional, more top-down, and we also have elements of being very collegial. So not every organization actually has one culture. There's elements, and that's okay. It doesn't make the culture, it doesn't make the organization bad. It is what it is, and those are the elements that you just have to be able to define and look at. So I have an opportunity for you to maybe have a little fun, and this is by no means a scientific poll, but just a kind of a brief snippet. And Carter's going to be able to put up a little poll here in a moment, and you can see if you can recognize some of the elements of your organizational culture. So if you think your organization is more like a loyal extended family with leadership that's more mentoring and supportive, then let's say you're number 1. If your organization encourages more risk-taking, likes to be on the cutting edge, with leadership that's more innovative, let's say you're number 2. If your organization is more competitive and more aggressive, focused on winning, then you'd be number 3. And if your organization is very structured and very formal, and your leadership emphasizes that predictability and stability, then you'd be number 4. So I'm going to let Carter go ahead and start a polling process, and let's kind of see really where we are with the institutions that are participating today.
Dr. Bobak?
Yes, Carter.
Okay, so far we've got 78% of the attendees having responded to the poll. 31% of them are number 1, 15% is number 2, 15% is number 3, and 39% is number 4.
Well, congratulations. Congratulations. You have a really nice mix of organizations. And what I will tell you that from the research actually demonstrates that a lot of higher education tends to be number 4, which is actually the hierarchical culture. Because we like tradition. Higher education really, really likes tradition. Think about a graduation. Think about the pomp and the circumstance. We all have those wonderful robes, and you know what to do. Someone moves their tassel. We know what that symbolizes. We understand and we like that predictability. But I can also tell you that faculty and a large number of managers within higher education also work toward number 1, which is the clan culture. And the clan culture, just again, very collegial. Folks that like to work in teams, that will be more collaborative, and that are more supportive of each other and really value the values of communication and team building. Less frequently do you see higher education in the other two cultures. Number 2 is the adhocracy culture. So those are the more innovative folks. Those are the people that are really entrepreneurial, that are really trying to, kind of be at the cutting edge of what their organizations and what their mission really calls for. And number 3 is the market culture. And again, those are the folks that are really that are the market culture folks. Those are the people that are really very competitive. They're very hard driving, and they really also just want to be able to win that marketplace and be, kind of identify with where they want to be for the future, for the long haul. Well, aside from doing all of that identification of those 4 cultures, when we began our change process, I had the opportunity to actually collect some feedback and talk with faculty about some of their thoughts, because we were instituting these change processes because we really needed to. We needed to meet those accreditation standards, and we just didn't want to meet them. We wanted to exceed them. So as we were beginning this process, I really wanted to get faculty's feedback on what was going on. And so some of the thoughts that they really shared was that, there was a lack of trust in those accreditors. They just felt that the accreditors didn't understand what was happening at the very core level of our programs, of our institutions, and they felt that the change, especially to a competency-based assessment standard, was not really what we needed. So those faculty were really, really pushing back and really wanting to maintain the status quo. And they also communicated that they really didn't understand the assessment processes that we were talking about, didn't understand why they were even needed, and felt that their concerns and their needs of we're good enough as we are, felt that those concerns were not being heard at all. Well, what that actually revealed was a lot of fear on their part, and that's actually called some fear or learning anxiety. They were really afraid to kind of learn new things. So there's a fear that faculty frequently have of looking incompetent because there's a new process going on. There's a fear of punishment for perhaps looking incompetent, a fear of loss of status or of power because they may be, the leader of a group that with a new change, they may not have that position any longer. Maybe a loss of personal identity or even group membership. The issue that I came up with is that, or the concerns that I came up with is that people really wanted to talk about this. So what you really have to do is what I let them do, and it's just really let them vent. Sometimes it's good. They have good things to say. Sometimes it can be pretty brutal, but you have to let them vent and share their concerns. And you have to acknowledge their fears. And once they vent and they can blow off some of their steam, you can actually take a step back because now they're beginning to trust you, and they will start to trust the process that you're going to start to build. You're going to try to increase the engagement of them in this whole process. So moving to a culture of assessment can be a bit of a struggle. Because a culture of assessment doesn't simply imply that it's a prescriptive mandate, that there's a top-down, your president says, today we have a culture of assessment, but rather it really says that assessment becomes part of the culture and it's really integrated into everything that faculty, staff, and administration really does. It's integrated into all your program goals, your course goals, and it's intentionally stated and planned around. And it's supported throughout the curriculum. That's what makes it sustainable when it's a consistent force. And what this does is it helps you to support the efforts of building that spiral curriculum. The majority of us really have designed our curriculums to resemble that spiral, where our students come in at the very beginning of their program. We train them in the very basics, and then as they move through the curriculum, we tend to build on those elements so that the process becomes cumulative. And when you have this culture of assessment and it's integrated into all of your coursework, it becomes sustainable because it's every day, it's a routine occurrence. So this culture of assessment, it just reinforces, as I just said, this cumulative learning process across the entire curriculum. Reviewing the individual course data without looking cumulatively or looking at that longitudinal perspective really helps to maintain individual faculty and department silos. And in fact, you get this misplaced confidence that students are really learning. You know, because you just don't understand. You don't know that what someone learned in their freshman biochemistry class, they can now apply in their sophomore nutrition class. You just don't know that. So a culture of assessment helps you to support that and reinforce the cumulative or the longitudinal perspective of all that data. Again, if you're not looking at the longitudinal or cumulative learning, you're not paying attention to all those details, and you're leaving just too much of all of this to chance. So how do you get to this point? How do you really get to this point of trying to increase that culture of assessment and increase all of this? And you have to start with change. Remember, you're trying to implement change and improvement not for the sake of change, because that's an element that has to be communicated. Change for the sake of change is busy work, and people get very annoyed with busy work. They have enough to do, they don't need more. So you have to be very clear about what is it you're trying to improve. So you need to define what you're improving. The next two elements is you have to, again, identify your culture and identify the strengths of your culture and identify your ultimate goals. Consider this to be like you're setting your GPS. So if you go on Google Maps and you pull up your phone and you go on Google Maps going to ask you. It's going to ask if they can use your current location. Say yes, because you have to start somewhere, and this is going to help you to start to chart your course. You have to know your beginning point, and you have to know your end point, and that helps you define how you're going to get to what your goals are. Again, it helps you to be proactive and identifying those gaps in between, as opposed to waiting to be reactive when an accreditor comes knocking and tells you you have a problem. So when I started talking with more and more of our faculty, I got the impression that it's not so much that faculty are so much wanting to say no, but they really just don't know how to say yes in many instances. So the sandwich educator is kind of a term that I coined around our campus, and it's really how I identified it is some of my faculty who are absolutely driven. They're passionate content experts, but they're not trained as educators. Many of them have been teaching the same way, using the same exam formats as they've always used. They teach as they were taught. They were almost handed things down by apostolic succession from previous generations, and they just have a fear of actually changing that because they might violate some sort of tenet of someone who came before them. Well, the problem is that we have a new generation of learners, and those students are no longer the same. So these faculty are really being pushed by these students that have changed, and they're being pushed by new accreditation standards, and there's increasing demands on these faculty that really push them out of their comfort zone. So these faculty can very frequently go into a class, look at a class, and say, they can read the class, and they're just marvelous at doing this. They can read the class and say, I know they've got it, or, ooh, I lost them on that topic. But reading the class does not equate to good assessments. They don't really know about the actual learning. So these educators that we're trying to bring aboard really need to be able to take the next step, and they need to see the value of change. For them to actually buy in, they actually have to know that what we're trying to change to or move to is actually of significant value. So the traditional way of creating some change is to really take your current knowledge and to move to a possible change process. And problems tend to arise when you use this traditional method simply because you have administration that's creating processes that you're expecting faculty to implement. And this really tends to discourage engagement, and it creates uncertainty because there's so many elements that are left unsaid. It's like faculty can't see Oz behind the curtain. They want to know what's back there. And it often, you create compliance really out of fear. There's, the fear of what will happen to me if I don't do this. But the problem is that you're actually going to create more resistance. And a change project that really doesn't take everyone's opinion into account in some way, shape, or form is really not going to be moving far very fast. And you need to really start to look for those elements of resistance. If you're in this framework, you need to start to look for those things. And that can look like denial and faculty voicing concerns, and they're denying that anything is right, that the accreditor is wrong, that administration is wrong, everything is wrong, and that voice of denial gets larger and larger. You might hear about scapegoating, where either a faculty member or a group or a department tends to blame everyone else. That, you know what, we do assessment and we're fine, it's them. It's that department. Oh my goodness, the basic scientists. Oh my goodness, the anatomists or those clinical scientists. There's this, a scapegoating. And then there's the group that'll try to maneuver around it and say, you know what, I could do more if you gave me release time. Or I could understand this process if there was some sort of reward in this for me. So there's that element of resistance of someone looking for some kind of secondary gain as well. Well, why is it that you really want buy-in to begin with? Well, you want buy-in to begin with because you believe in what you're doing. You want these goals to be successful. For us, we want academic excellence. We believe in our goals. We believe in our mission, and we're really driven by all of those elements. So we have, the opportunity to make improvements is really so much greater when you combine your faculty content expertise with all of the creative thinking that those faculty members can generate. So regular, open communication really encourages faculty to participate more, to be more active, and to really engage in the entire process. And what you start to find is that role models start to develop. You start to develop those individuals who actually can see the vision. And those individuals who are part of that decision-making process serve as role models and are valuable because what they do is they can provide insight into what the future could look like. It's not as scary if a faculty member can see someone else doing it. It's not a terrible thing, but they have a model that they can follow. So through the process, you start to develop and encourage more and more role models to become apparent. So what you really need to shift to is a different perspective of generating your solutions. You need to really move to generate much broader, much greater input from all different sources, because the end result is going to be this collaborative effort creates this very rich pool of results that faculty actually take pride in. When they have input into it, they tend to value what's there. And as long as you really keep the focus on student learning, remember those external demands like accreditation standards, those will be met. So you really don't need to worry so much about those. What you really need to worry about are your internal processes moving all of this forward. So you know what, as we kind of move through the process, You can use some of the elements of improvement science to help the process along. And this actually works really well for a lot of faculty because they can see the link to best practices here, which really drives a lot of our programs. So improvement science is kind of an emerging concept that focuses on improvement and making changes in the most effective and best practice way. You want to be able to, again, reduce that gap between what is actual and what is possible. So you need to begin somewhere, and you need to define what is actual. Find your baseline, and you need to be brutally honest. It's not always pretty. You just need to be honest. And if you identify this for yourself, your creditors don't have to find it. So that's a very, very powerful thing. You then need to try to support your change with data. Where does this initial data come from? Anywhere it can. It comes from the existing course and program assessments that you have. And you want to be able to collect all of this. And again, one of the issues that many institutions have is that accreditors will tell you that you collect a lot of data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, but you don't do anything with it. Now's the time to do something with that. And now you start to look at your data. And then you have to define what's possible. Where do you want to be? So you get to define that, or in some cases your accreditor defines that for you. And really the difference between where you are and where you want to be, that's the gap that you're trying to close. Now this is the most important thing. This is the most important thing of anything that I'll really say. And here, just remember that communication is king. Regular and frequent communication with all your stakeholder groups creates that transparency, accountability, and teamwork. This is so vitally important. Remember that not every stakeholder group can actually hear the communication that you're putting out in the way that's useful for them. So you've got to be the one that goes out to identify essentially what language they speak. Administrators that are managing state reports or accreditation standards need information in certain ways. You need to learn what that language is and provide it to them the best they can. Faculty will be at all different stages of learning. And you need to learn those stages and again, meet them where they are. And students, do your students really understand your program goals? If not, ask them. You just need to find out. You need to ask them. Because students often need help developing their skills of self-assessment to enable them to critically review their own work against the acceptable standards. Self-assessment in this process for students is, again, a huge tool. This is something that all of our programs are being mandated to follow up with. Students need to be critical thinkers and they need to be reflective. So this is a process that we really, all of us, need to focus on. So creating this culture of assessment requires a lot of passion and a lot of persistence. This really, it is not an easy process, but it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly valuable, and it's very rewarding. The thing you just need to be aware of is that while you might start with excitement and the rah of some cheerleaders, it can quickly move to frustration and exhaustion, but you really do need to stick with it. You need to understand that thinking about doing something is easy, but actually creating and maintaining that change is not. So again, this is not for the faint-hearted, but it's something that if you're passionate about, it's entirely possible, and it's so exciting to see it happen. Just remember, again, mediocre efforts regenerate those mediocre results. And none of us, I can tell you, have an institutional mission that says that we want to be okay. And I can also tell you that from my perspective, I don't want any members of my family seeing a doctor of chiropractic who is academically average. Academic excellence is what our mission is, and that's what we have a duty to provide. So we found at this point that where ExamSoft was a tremendous help to us because it really helped to provide something that we were unable to capture in the past, and that's really longitudinal perspective, longitudinal data in what we were looking at. And this is an example that Carter was able to give me. This is not part of our own student data, but this is just an example of one student's longitudinal report. And this also speaks to the fact that not everyone hears the same language. That sometimes communication needs to be a little different for different stakeholders. So the colors work really well for a lot of students and faculty as well. So when a student looks at their overall analysis, they can see very quickly that, you know, in the level of recall, they're doing quite well. They're green, everything. They're doing pretty well at that level. But by the time they get up to the applying stage in that affective domain, or the cognitive domain, they're not grasping it as well. This really helps them to understand that they need to focus on their studies a little bit differently. They may need to get tutoring or mentoring or work with faculty members in a different way, because it may not be a content issue, but it may be the processing issue of they can't put those puzzle pieces together. Again, if you looked at lower level, when we talk about some of the specific learning objectives, again, the student is doing fairly well with basic biology, but not so hot with the nervous system. And again, that's a topic that student can focus on overall as they're starting to do their reviews. But it's empowering to students to have that individual data. Now, the data is also extremely valuable to administration and to faculty. And from an institutional perspective, I can tell you this has been so powerful to helping us to create more and more buy-in across our program and within our institution is this particular, the longitudinal and cumulative reporting data. Because what this is telling us now is that across the program, and again, this is an example that Carter was able to share with me, that across the program you're looking at how many exams were given to include these specific levels of Bloom's taxonomy or specific outcomes. And then how many items on those individual exams. And then you can look at the individual students. So you can actually find out what, you know, the depth of your curriculum, and it's from a 30,000-foot overview. Are you teaching what you think you're teaching? Are you assessing that on that level? Because if you value it, you will assess it. And is it showing up at the depth that you find is appropriate? And then you can look at that individual student level. And you can make changes to, a faculty member can make changes to a course based on the findings of those individual students, and the students can then work with that faculty to find their own individual strengths and weaknesses. So what did we do with all of this information? As I already said, we had to start somewhere, and we found that ExamSoft was really helpful to us, but we didn't start with ExamSoft. We decided we were going to be the folks that were going to struggle and kind of be that brave challenge and go out on our own and see what we could do. And we actually started to create static Excel curriculum maps. But what we quickly found out was that that required a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of management and oversight. And it had a huge downside, was that it gave people the impression that assessment was an annual event, because those curriculum maps could only be managed and updated as time permitted, which became an annual event. And this just wasn't, we weren't getting the appropriate message out. So part of our goal simply wasn't being met. We were struggling with where we really needed to go. And we really needed to, we started our curriculum maps by linking to all of our board parts. We have 4 parts to our accrediting, our board examinations for our students. So we linked all of that, but we now needed to link back to more than just that, to our accreditation standards. So we were kind of feeling like we were in over our heads. And we were just not feeling like we knew where we were going. So we understood that what we couldn't improve, what we couldn't measure, and we weren't measuring to that granular level that we really wanted to get to. So we needed to be able to communicate those goals to everyone, and that included to senior staff as well, that we needed more, and we really wanted to get everyone's buy-in to this whole process. We really needed to be able to break this down so that, again, that small levels, and break down our goals into really manageable and achievable steps, and then be able to celebrate those. Again, the biggest issue that we have is that we wanted to develop a close relationship with faculty and administration, because that helped us with our implementation process. So we kind of took our step back and then created individual course maps. And what this told us was that each course, each faculty course director was creating a map for their core courses, and that started with their course objectives. And what that told us was that not everybody could write good course objectives. That was a faculty development opportunity. We then had faculty link those course objectives to our accreditation outcomes. And again, that was where faculty needed to really get to the nitty-gritty of what the expectations were there. We linked those again to Bloom's taxonomy or Krathwohl's, and then we had faculty really carefully delineate how are you teaching those outcomes. And then what assessments are you using? Are you currently using? Are you using lecture exams? Do you have practical exams? Do you have student presentations? Do you have case studies? What are the results? And the results of that, not just good, bad, or indifferent, but rather what percentage of your students are achieving, say, an 80% or higher, a 90% or higher. And that becomes very valuable to us because, again, I don't want faculty, I don't want my family members going to the average chiropractor. I think that we owe it to our patients, the students' future patients, to demonstrate that they have a complete knowledge. And we can do that by reviewing our assessments on a very granular level. So that's where we started. And then we started with ExamSoft. And what we did was after faculty had completed those course level maps, they were able then to transfer their initially, we were starting with their lecture exams and all the lectures exams, identifying all of their question banks, loading them into ExamSoft, and tagging them to Bloom's taxonomy, Krathwohl's, are not only our board parts, but our accreditation standards as well. And this is just a demonstration of a few of the elements that our faculty are now tagging all of their exams to. So really, what we take back from all of this is we really needed to set our priorities and really establish some of those realistic steps as we were moving forward, and just really commit to the resources, and that including resources like ExamSoft and the appropriate staffing. And don't worry, you have to start by creating change, and you will be making mistakes. Again, until you start, you can't drive a car by reading the owner's manual. You've got to start somewhere. You will make mistakes, but it's okay to make those mistakes. You need to identify that, correct it, and then turn yourself around. And then for us, we needed to find out who's really minding the store, who's looking at all of this assessment data. So we really needed to take another step back and set up a framework for an assessment committee so that was inclusive of all the different areas of our program. And this committee then now provides information back to faculty on a regular basis at faculty meetings. So again, we needed to celebrate our successes because we started a process and we were having successes. We had role models demonstrating those new attitudes and behaviors, and really an example for others. This isn't just an important thing. It's really sometimes the only thing that will help people to change. And those role models will really become really positive trainers for their peers. So this was absolutely vital. So utilizing the data and actually starting a process was a remarkable achievement. And yes, we're celebrating even our small successes. So what does buy-in really look like? For us, buy-in looks like faculty asking for more data. When faculty actually come and actually ask to be on the assessment committee, when they actually come to work with other faculty to create greater banks of test questions and collaborate across that, they're asking for that data to be used. They're asking. We see the change processes are being documented via those course level maps or even in faculty portfolios, because faculty are moving out of that talking head in the front of the room to becoming the educators that are really looking at the very granular level of the assessments in their courses to demonstrate growth for their students. We see an increasing sense of pride. Faculty are actually excited about what they're seeing, and we're getting the high fives from the hall, and that actually is no joke. It actually does happen. There's an increase in collaboration by faculty supporting each other, and you see a change in stakeholder groups. I've actually had students that have come to me and want to participate in this change that they sense is happening on campus. And remember that students will rise to those new expectations if they know that it's part of the new cultural norm. And that's been an extremely powerful thing for me to really realize. So the signs you want to be looking for are those signs of resistance. So please, please be very watchful for those individuals who refuse to give you input. And you know who they are. They're sitting in the back of the room during a faculty meeting, and they're just got their hands folded and they're not going to play. You just need to be aware of that and really try to interact and find out what their fear level is. So those faculty who give you limited input, who don't want to engage, who won't take ownership or accountability. And if you have a lack of senior staff buy-in, that's a challenge for you as well, and you need to share that communication and continue to share that data up and see if you can really break through some of that resistance as well. And again, when you have a lack of trust, you have that increase in fear, and that fear of punishment is always lurking for some people who really just don't know what to expect. That just needs to be overcome. But one of the most powerful ways, like I said, that we've been able to overcome a lot of that is by using and reinforcing the effects of the cumulative assessment or those longitudinal data reports that we have. Those reports become the real mortar that really binds our courses and our individual assessments together. And it's when you study those longitudinal assessments that you identify the gaps in your curriculum. They become transparent. They don't become so much of a blame issue as a programmatic challenge. And that's the value of this, is now you're creating a team that can overcome a challenge as opposed to a finger that's pointing blame. So again, as we move this process, it's been very exciting. We start small. We start with utilizing the data, making changes as we utilize that data, and really move that process forward so that the point where more data can be used, more change can be implemented, and more folks are actually being brought into the process of change, and ultimately hoping that we're going to gather our breakthrough results. So just kind of quickly, our final pointers here is that you need to realize that there is no one best culture. Your culture that you have is the best culture. Just simply find the strengths to achieve your goals. And don't disregard those culture norms, because they will, if you do, they will tend to really, really endanger all of the processes that you have going on. Pay close attention to the data that you have and share all those, as appropriate, share that data very regularly. And remember, communication is king. You need to keep an eye on all the feedback, positive, negative, or neutral. That's how you identify your sources of resistance and conflict, and you can really do yourself a lot of harm if you really just kind of let down your guard and ignore those. So recommendations that I would say is that I will tell you with one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through this whole process is simply to you need to trust what people are saying. You need to listen to what those folks are saying, and really understand the language that they're speaking. And you need to then communicate in a way that they understand. Sometimes this takes time from a new leader, but consider this an investment. If you're new to your role, or even if you're not, being consciously aware of those subtle, unwritten processes that exist will be an investment in your future. Really, you need to lead by an example, set an example, be a role model, and provide those models for other folks. And again, for faculty, they need to take a step forward and really voice their concerns about the process and be their own advocate. They need to really be able to voice that and start with something. They need to stop procrastinating and simply move the process forward.